The French King Louis XIV, better known as the Sun King, was famous not only for his record 72-year reign, but also for his fanatical love of enemas. Yes, these procedures, which he believed to be the key to good health and perfect appearance. However, the monarch's overenthusiasm for this miracle cure led to a very serious problem, a rectal fistula, which made his life a living hell. How did this happen? Let's find out together. Enema fashion, health or happiness? In the 17th century, enemas were not just a medical procedure, but a real social trend. Aristocrats, including King Louis XIV, were so keen on the activity that they sometimes had enemas almost every day. Imagine, fashionable ladies and gentlemen did not discuss diet or sport, but boasted about the number of cleansing procedures, as if it were a sign of refinement and nobility. How France became addicted to enemas. The French aristocracy's love affair with bowel cleansing was not only medical, but also aesthetic. At the time, enemas were believed to help maintain a radiant appearance, prevent aging, and even improve mood. Louis XIV, for example, believed that solutions flavored with bergamot, rose, and angelica helped him look young and fresh. Add to this the fashion for lavish feasts, after which the stomach and intestines needed to be unloaded, and you have the perfect ground for enemas to become an integral part of aristocratic life. One court lady even claimed that they were refreshing in the morning and relaxing before bed. Medical boom or mass delusion? Of course, there were some doctors who took the practice of enemas seriously. In the 18th century, official medicine was nowhere near as advanced as it is today, and it was believed that cleansing the bowels helped to get rid of bad juices. Diseases were often explained by an imbalance of fluids in the body, the so-called enemas theory, and the enema was seen as a way of restoring harmony. But here's the rub: overuse of these procedures had the opposite effect. The frequent introduction of fluids disturbed the natural flora of the intestines, irritated the mucous membranes, and even led to severe inflammation, as in the case of Louis XIV. From enemas to fistulas. The king was so fond of the procedure that his body simply could not take it. The incompetent court physicians, who misused the sprays, caused him to develop a rectal fistula. It's ironic that what was supposed to bring relief and health ended up causing years of agony. Nevertheless, even after the king's story, enemas did not lose their popularity. In fact, many courtiers, seeing Louis XIV suffering, began to give themselves enemas in the hope of getting closer to him. Imagine, some even artificially induce similar problems in order to be honored with the same operation as the king. If personal hygiene is not your thing. Louis XIV, nicknamed the Sun King, ruled France for 72 years, conquered Europe and dictated fashion, but one thing he didn't conquer was the bathroom. In those days, however, it was not considered shameful. The French aristocracy was suspicious of water, believing that bathing could be harmful to health. And Louis was an ardent believer in this theory. Why did Versailles dislike water? It is hard to imagine today, but in the 18th century washing was considered a bad habit rather than a useful one. Doctors of the time argued that water opened the pores, allowing disease to enter the body. Aristocrats believed that it was better to simply change clothes and douse oneself in perfume, and one would be fresh and beautiful again. As a result, Versailles was filled with incredible smells, and it's not just the smell of lavender. It is believed that Louis XIV took a bath no more than 2 or 3 times in his life. And that was at the insistence of his doctors. Water frightened the king, But he loved perfume. He used it in such quantities that, according to contemporaries, it could be smelled several rooms away. How did the king manage without water? The lack of water did not stop Louis from maintaining his own standards of hygiene. For example, he changed his lace shirts daily. He had hundreds of them. The white fabric absorbed sweat and dirt, and because the clothes were changed several times a day, it was believed that the man remained clean. But here's the thing, no deodorant could hide the effects of long periods without soap. Legend has it that one of the first foreign ambassadors to visit the court remarked that the monarch smells like a wild animal. And if it were only Louis? Most courtiers weren't very fond of water either, preferring to mask odors with heavy perfumes. How did Versailles deal with perfume? The Palace of Versailles was a symbol of luxury, but far from clean. Despite the marble halls and gilded walls, the interior was a mess. There were almost no toilets as such. Courtiers used portable potties or generally defecated in the corridors and behind columns in the garden. Vases of aromatic herbs were placed in the rooms to mask the odors, and rose petals were regularly scattered on the parquet floor. But here's the interesting thing, despite all these fragrant measures, the odors at court left much to be desired. Contemporaries recalled that during the warm summer months, Versailles literally boiled with the smell of sweat, stale clothes, and overflowing night pots. How did this affect the king's health? The lack of hygiene and the constant wearing of tight clothing had a devastating effect on the king. During military campaigns, when conditions were particularly harsh, Louis XIV contracted skin infections, which were later aggravated by endless enemas and led to a fistula. But despite the excruciating pain and terrible consequences, the king never changed his views on cleanliness. Even when the first public baths were built in France, Louis XIV still avoided water and relied solely on his favorite perfume. How Louis XIV literally sat on the throne. By 1686, the situation had taken a serious turn. The king could no longer sit due to severe pain. So much so that when he received Thai ambassadors, he looked so bad that the engraving of the time shows the face of a man clearly suffering from the constipation of the century. When the ambassador returned home, he was asked what he thought the French monarch looked like, and he replied, "He smells like a wild animal." It wasn't just that Louis XIV didn't wash, it was that the fistula had reached his rectum and was beginning to, well, let's just say, release odors on its own. The king literally locked himself in his chambers, could not walk, and fell into depression. So the courtiers decided they needed a surgeon. A chance for salvation, a barber with a knife. Medicine at that time was extremely radical. They treated whatever they could get their hands on. A bad tooth? Pull it out. A headache? Drill into the skull. So when it was decided to operate on the king, they called in Charles-François Félix, who was not only a surgeon but also a barber. Fortunately for Louis, Félix turned out to be more than just a barber. He realized that no one had ever done it before, so he had to practice. How? Very simple, on prisoners. People with similar problems were brought in from prisons in France, and Félix honed his skills on them. It wasn't humanistic, but he was thoroughly prepared for the operation. The operation of the century, the king's courage. On the 18th of November, 1686, a legendary operation took place. Louis XIV was lying on his stomach, and when Félix became nervous, the king said, "Imagine that I am a simple man. Well, it sounded like an order to the doctor. The operation lasted 2 hours, no anesthetic, except prayers and whiskey from the minister who held the king's hand, but Louis didn't make a sound. When it was all over, the surgeon collapsed exhausted in a chair and the bandages were moistened with burgundy wine, on the principle of if it doesn't help, at least you can drink it. A few weeks later it was discovered that the tissue was not growing properly and a second operation had to be performed. This time, the king was no hero and went straight to bed. The fashion for fistulas and their unexpected consequences. When Louis XIV recovered, the whole court breathed a sigh of relief. So much so that they commissioned a hymn in honor of his recovery. The English later liked it so much that they adopted it, and it became the basis of the British anthem God Save the King. But the strangest consequence was that the fashion for the royal whistle took hold of the aristocracy. Some courtiers volunteered for the operation so that they could experience the same suffering as the king and please the monarch at the same time. Charles Francois Felix was given a title, a lot of land, and the right to experiment as he pleased. And his surgical instrument can still be seen in French museums. Louis XIV's madness didn't end there. As well as enemas, he loved to watch births. Especially if it was his mistress who was giving birth. And to make it more comfortable to watch, he even had special beds designed for women in labor, with a better view for the audience. Well, kings are people too, but sometimes very strange people. The story of Louis XIV is a prime example of how fashion, medical misconceptions, and personal quirks can play cruel tricks on even the most powerful man in Europe. The Sun King believed in the power of enemas, avoided water, and eventually underwent excruciating operations that nearly cost him his life. But thanks to his surgeon's skill and his own resilience, Louis not only survived, he introduced the fistula to palace circles. Yes, there was such a thing. Now let's discuss. What do you think of this unexpected turn in the story? What surprised you most, the king's fanaticism for enemas, his fear of water, or the fashion for bandaged buttocks? Let us know in the comments. And of course, if you like this dissection of strange royal habits, give us a like, subscribe to the channel and click the bell to not miss any more amazing and funny stories from the past. See you in the new videos.